Welcome to our Security and Risk Professional Insight series. My name's Chris Cubbage. I'm the editor with MySecurityTV. This is episode 5 of this particular series, Advancements and Applications for Critical Infrastructure Protection and High Security Environments. Welcome to those signing in and also welcome to our panel. This is a lead-up event as to our Space and Earth conference later in the year in Perth, and I'll just walk through this particular series. Joining us today is Dr. Kevin Foster, the Regional Vice President, ASIS International, and very well known in the industry, and they're in Perth. Kevin, thanks for joining us. Great. Rachel DeLuca will come on very shortly. She's based in Melbourne. She's the Director with Protective Security Advisory, and I'll bring her on very shortly. Ben Beard, also, you're in Canberra, Ben, right?
That's right.
Yep, yeah. Ben Beard in Canberra. Director with Mithril Security, and Aaron Lincoln in Brisbane, National BDM Technical Products with Davcor Group. Aaron, thanks for joining us again. And a debut, Natalie Cook in Canberra, a criminology and counterterrorism expert, and also on the front line. Natalie, thank you very much for joining us today. I'll come back to the panel. That will give Rachel a few minutes as well. Let me just walk through to our audience, particularly if this is your first time joining us. The protocols here. This session is recorded and it will be available. I'll definitely by Monday, but I'll make it available as soon as I can, probably over the weekend. It'll be up on our Security and Risk Professionals Insight website. Very much welcome questions. We tend not to get many, but you're very much welcome to ask some questions and also fire into the chat in terms of any comments or where you're listening from as well, and keep it constructive as well. But we do welcome your engagement also. This series is sponsored. Our national sponsor is Curtin University, and the series is sponsored by Diversified Communications for the Security Exhibition and Conference on next week at the ICC, and also Davcor Group with the EKA, Cyberlock and Ever Access to Security. And our industry supporters are ASIL, the Australian Security Industry Association, ASIS International Australian Chapters, and the Australian Institute of Professional Intelligence Officers, or AIPIO. I mentioned there'll be a cyber pavilion next week at the ICC, so hopefully we'll see many of you there in Sydney for the Security Expo as well, and check out that cyber pavilion. This is a sort of an overview of what we've been doing for the year. We've been doing events throughout Australia and also in the region. But we've also ran a recent event in Melbourne and up on the Sunshine Coast as well. And this is, again, I mentioned the lead up to the Space and Earth Conference as a part of a WA Space Week alongside the Asia Pacific Regional Space Agency Forum that we're running in Perth. So hopefully you can get over to Perth for this week of space and technology events at Crown Perth. As in the lead up to that, we've just announced we're going to be running an Australia and India webinar on the 28th of August, looking at space and technology opportunities for collaboration in partnership with the SI Association, or Space Industry Association of India, and we'll have a range of speakers on that. So that is available on our website. We're also doing a series with BugCrowd looking at Hack the Hackers. So we're getting a range of ethical hackers as well as CISOs on this series, and we'll be doing interviews, and there's some report updates on those as well. So check that one out. And if for Singapore and in Malaysia, we've got some Women in Security dinner events as part of the awards for the Southeast Asian region as well. So again, that is available. And we're just concluding our series with the Sunshine Coast and looking at the digital infrastructure that is available on the Sunshine Coast, and the Testing Tech in Paradise series. This is now available on demand. And our webinar from Wednesday, looking at cybersecurity in operational technology, or OT cyber, is available also. These sessions, so episode 3, I mentioned this is episode 5, SEPTED and crime prevention and detection. We did a live session in Melbourne in June, looking at managing risk in an augmented world, and our opening episodes 1 and 2, looking at private security sector during multi-regional conflict. This episode today very much relates to these 2 episodes here, so they are worth checking out, and they're available on demand, looking at the international environment and the security environment that we are in, and as we would say, the current security environment. So that's enough from me and our introduction. I might just walk through the panel, just kind of get a sense of where you're at. We've just seen in the Australian landscape our terrorism alert level raised from possible to probable in response to the current environment, whether things are getting worse or not. But it's one of those things that it's very hard to predict. But we'll start with you, Kevin, just sort of what your current role is and how this sort of topic, breaches, protests, security planning and response, might relate to you.
Okay, thank you, Chris. I'm the Regional Vice President of ASIS International, which is an organisation of professional security people. My background is in the engineering aspects of security and also risk analysis, resilience and risk management generally. I worked on the construction of Parliament House back in the 80s. Did some work up there at Parliament House after someone drove us a Mitsubishi Pajero through the front door, and then did some further work at Parliament House in the early 2000s, about 2005-06, to improve perimeter security to stop vehicles from getting too close to the building. So I have a bit of expertise there. And but in recent years, my focus has been on improving resilience, which is taking risk management to another level.
Got it. Thank you. We'll have a look. So I didn't mention, but part of our session today, we'll look at some of the recent events that have been happening and just get that sort of professional insight as to prevention as well as pre-planning in response to similar events that are likely to happen into the future. Rachel may not be joining us. We'll see how we go. But Ben, over to you in terms of your current role and Mithril Security.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, I'm Ben Beard from Mithril Security. Mithril Security is a training provider helping security professionals meet government security requirements. So building and managing security zones and a whole range of other topics that we cover. And I think in my background, I just about picked up where Kevin left off. So I've been up to the house a few times as well, doing different reviews up there. So should be a good discussion.
Thank you. And Aaron with DavCore.
Yeah, Aaron Lincoln. I'm the Business Development Manager for the technical product side for the DavCore Group, which are a physical locking hardware distributor and manufacturer based here in Australia. My sort of where I sort of sit with this is I work with primarily local and state governments, federal government, and critical infrastructure organisations on improving physical access security, over sort of cyber. And yes, I do have a link to Parliament House as well. So
nice. And I definitely saw your relevance there, particularly given we'll have a look at the Paris sabotage attacks on the rail systems and internet fibre systems as well, where cabinets were set on fire, and it's always been a big issue. A lot of cabinets are out in the open without appropriate locking systems. Natalie, your current background, we've got a bit of a similar background, but definitely different roles now.
Hi, thank you for having me. So I work in basically the systems that all these men have built for me to work in. So my current role is a front-facing protective security officer. I'm driven by security risk management and all PSPF, ASIO tech nodes, all of the governance and compliance is what I work through. I'm in a federal agency setting. Unfortunately, I can't disclose it to you. Some of the men will remember my face, and we've probably interacted with each other in person when you've come to Canberra. But yeah, so basically I come from a criminology background. Policing and military was my first start in my career. And now I'm just kind of, working through the process of working in APS and driving responses and trying to find a holistic balance between a little bit of preemptive action and a little bit of proactive action, and then also response to the evolving threat landscape that we're going through currently. So, yeah.
Very good. I'll stop the share there and we'll just go into an open discussion. And it was actually Natalie posted just some constructive feedback, I suppose, following the recent protest in Canberra. And that follows some years ago, but it was a $126 million upgrade at Parliament House, and then access to the roof, and then just the methodology that was deployed for that protest does raise some questions as to the foreseeable nature of that, and some of the responses. But then we also looked at, we're going to discuss, or in reflection of the assassination attempt on Trump and the recognised failures of the Secret Service in that particular scenario, and then just general protest activity that we're seeing almost every weekend in every city, and then some of the direct attacks on parliamentary members and officers as well, and then even in reflection to what we've seen at Westfield, Bondi Junction, some Sydney attacks, and what we've seen in the UK in following on from stabbing attacks as well. So it becomes very unpredictable, but predictable in its unpredictability. Maybe to Kevin, how do you approach this, I suppose, from a security planning aspect? It's very much post 9/11 kind of scenario right now, where, although different in its style and approach, where 9/11, large terrorism attacks, you know, sort of the Bali bombing type approaches, where now weapon devices, lone actors with little to no planning, as ASIO came out, Mike Burgess sort of highlighted in his raise of from possible to probable, is the types of attacks are random, lone wolf actors, and with little to no planning. How do you kind of respond to that from a security planning viewpoint? Mute. Sorry.
I think that the the general risk analysis approach is not changed. It's still the same. What's kind of missing is some of the intelligence that's coming into that analysis process to give us a little bit more certainty as to who the threat is and when that might be. But I think that it's been very common for a long time that we don't really know when things are going to happen, and that we have to plan for any kind of activity that might happen. And I think most people who do risk analysis and threat assessments do have a pretty good understanding of what's happening around the place and what we need to be thinking about. So I think that hasn't really changed. And I think that where risk management has changed a little bit in recent years is that we've gone from, I guess, taking this idea of trying to analyse threats and risks in a probabilistic kind of way, either subjectively or objectively, and we still need to do that. But we're now moving our thinking along a little bit to say, well, if maybe we don't really know what's going to happen next year at all, and something new might pop up altogether. We understand protests, we understand, lone actors popping up doing the sort of things that they do all the time. But what we don't know is something new that might happen. And so that's where we need to start developing resilience ideas, where organisations and sometimes the technology as well need to adapt to the new threat environment as it arises. I think the sort of protests that we've seen of late, and even the attacks on cables for train systems and that sort of thing, that's been around for a long time, those sort of attacks. So they are quite predictable. And you really got to plan for those and have your business continuity plans and have your resilience plans, and how are you going to design your engineering to deal with it. But I think that it's the future things that we need to think about a little bit more that we don't fully understand yet. We've got to make our organisations more adaptable to that.
Can I make an observation? I'll come to you, Ben. But the observation that breaches, and I've had these three words on purpose, but breaches, protests and attacks seem to be happening all at once. So if we look at Parliament House, where there was diversionary phone calls, there's, and again, back to the Olympics as well, where, the Olympics is on, you've got a security operation and there's other attacks going on, there's other protests going on all at the same time. and much like the protest at Parliament House, diversionary phone calls. So there's other things happening as part of a sort of an exercise, a counter exercise that would maybe not have seen before, where normally it's just a focused attack. Whereas this, if it's a coordinated attack from different sectors, becomes much more difficult to manage and can be diversionary to where your resources are. Ben, you highlight that things aren't necessarily escalating, but there's just a lot of activity happening. How would you just sort of describe it and recommend an approach?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, it's an interesting time to be in security. We've got threat actors working in different ways from a whole range of different sources. I think, like Kevin says, you start with the baseline of security risk management, and like I love the risk managed approach. It's the best way for us to allocate those finite resources. But what I started to take from some of these recent events is that you can set your posture for the most probable risk to take place, but what happens on the day might be above what you've predicted or below. So that comes back to Kevin's comments on resilience, and something that we're looking at with simulation and exercise is you need to train people on how they're going to respond to those unexpected events as well.
Yeah, I gave a session yesterday to a client, and they, we sort of, not so much scenario planning, but we came down to the basics of, if something happens, you need to have basic first aid training. So if it's a weapon attack or a small explosion, things about stopping blood flow and, basic first aid response, and then understanding how your lockdown procedures will be and your evacuation procedures. Outside of those basic capabilities, there's not a lot you can do. You can think about worst case scenarios, but whatever the scenario is, it may either cause you to evacuate or cause you to lock down. That's all you're going to be able to actually do from an operational viewpoint. Maybe to you, Natalie, we had a discussion pre this event, is communicating that risk up the line. If you're seeing a vulnerability, if you're adapting what you are seeing day to day, and then applying some of the scenarios that are actually occurring, and then seeing vulnerabilities, how do you kind of communicate the risk and mitigate some of that? Oh, wrong buttons.
Sorry,
There you go.
Yeah, so we did have a discussion about, like, you could be a really brilliant communicator, or as we see, like, sort of a bit of succession planning coming through, and this is in privatised security as well as public, APS, whether it's state or federal jurisdiction, where even young people who are fresh out of uni, they don't necessarily have the communication techniques. But if you're delivering to somebody who isn't security minded, who doesn't understand like a multi-dimensional holistic approach to security in depth, which we all know about security in depth, then essentially you could be telling them, this person's coming, they'll be here in half an hour, we need to get prepared. But if there's no comprehension behind what you're delivering, you can't have robust security systems. And training obviously falls into this as well. You can have the most brilliant, sophisticated system worth $100 million or $5 billion, but if you don't practice these types of lockdown procedures, your emergency sort of management and that type of security, when they come, you're sort of going a bit blind, So, yeah, having good communication skills, verbally and written communication skills, is quite important. And you need to be able to deliver. We work quite technical. We definitely work in a STEM field, and trying to convey complex information to people who are not security minded is a frustration in itself, and everyone's nodding because they're like, oh, yep, definitely, sister. So, these are our own frustrations as security professionals, and it's very important that everybody understands we all have to go through this, and you do individually build resilience to be able to go, okay, I didn't deliver what I needed to correctly this time, I'm going to try a different approach. And this is part of security. We all have to sort of evolve to the threat landscape as it develops, not just in Australia in a domestic setting, but internationally as well. So, yeah.
I think getting the pulse of updates is a key one. I mentioned yesterday with a client, I do it every year. So there's always a bit of you mentioned transition and succession. These are event managers. And so there's always ones that saw it last year or even have done 2 or 3, but there's always a new cohort coming through. And I try to keep old content there and then just update it, particularly if it's a attack vector. I had slides there from 10 years ago where there were knife attacks in the middle of London. And here we are seeing it again 10 years later. And I kind of go, that's what I said 10 years ago. And here it is. This still happens on an ongoing basis to keeping that sort of update, but reflecting on what's happened before. Because I think it's getting the right mindset. We all come in with a security mindset, whereas other people who don't have the experience, it's hard to get them on standby mode without having to panic. Is that the challenge? I know, Ben, your approach is workshopping. Do you find workshopping with smaller groups allows you to sort of deep dive a bit better than a sort of large exercise where there'll be people not taking it seriously?
Yeah, I think so. It's it allows people to learn from their mistakes. So what I'm trying to do with the workshops and simulations is we can have a simulated armed attacker in the facility, and they don't put any measures in, and it goes really badly. So giving them that learned experience demonstrates why we have value behind the security measures that we want to put in place.
Yeah. Rachel, come on if you're ready. I've just texted you, but I can see you there. But you're welcome to here we go.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Oh, we can hear you. We can't see you.
You cannot? Oh, I can see me. That's weird.
Here you go. No, I've got it. There you are. Well done.
Hi. Apologies for being tardy.
No worries.
My name's Rachel DeLuca and I'm a security consultant.
Very good.
Yes.
You're Melbourne, Rachel, at the moment?
Melbourne, yes, that's correct.
Very good. Now, you've had a real job in the past in terms of had security responsibilities. Now you're moving into protective security consulting. I take you've been a little bit around us, but yeah, just how you would approach that security planning aspects and trying to communicate the current risk environment to decision makers, particularly if you're seeing vulnerabilities or areas for improvement.
Absolutely. So I have done this in consulting for many, many years and I've now started my own firm. But I did have a stint working as Chief Security Officer for Parliament here in Victoria. Also as a consultant too, you would know, Chris, you go into other people's business and try and communicate the severity of situations to the decision makers, you know, the engagement team, et cetera, and yeah, it's one of the biggest challenges is getting them to really appreciate and understand that you're not just saying it because you're trying to get some more money as a consultant, you know, spend some more money with me, engage my services, I can help you. No, that's not it at all. There are real threats out there, very, very real threats. And in Australia, we've been really fortunate up until now that we haven't had the types of incidents that do happen overseas. We're starting to see it building up now, but we're very naive in a lot of ways. And so there just hasn't been that sense of urgency. And there's very much oh, that doesn't happen here kind of attitude. In many organizations, I've seen, you know, security risk trying to be rolled into the ERM, so the Enterprise Risk Management Program, which can work if it's done really carefully, but then you lose sight over really identifying what your incoming threats are and recognizing where the business's vulnerabilities are in relation to those threats, which I think is the perfect way to go about the planning. And the others have said it as well, Kevin and Ben and Natalie touched on it also. It really is going back to the basic principles of Security 101, understanding what your exposure is, and then putting in place controls to mitigate against that. You're not going to be able to plan for every different scenario. That's just impossible. So just look at, you know, the basics and plan an exercise for everything that you can foresee.
We might come back to the security function. There's always discussion on where it should fit, but I think also who your champion should be. Security management tends to sit in middle management somewhere or even lower at facility management, and then trying to get a champion at the executive level is the next challenge. But bringing Aaron in, your observations in the market, Aaron, particularly, let's say, in light of what we saw in Paris, and I've got no doubt there's other incidents happening in Australia that we're not even hearing, particularly on, nuisance attacks on infrastructure, even down to graffiti and those kind of things. What's your observations in the market nationally with your role as technical manager?
Yeah, well, look, a lot of what I do is in that protecting of remote assets, and I completely agree with Rachel. There is this sort of level of, it's not complacency, but it's, the remote asset protection is not right up the top of the list. Most of the time when there's an attack, it is put down to vandalism. And my sort of comment on that is it's vandalism until it's not. It's not a far stretch, for someone to physically attack a remote asset. And we take the Paris example. Some of the photos I saw were a very shallow trench of cables, under a concrete cover, which is not lockable at all. But transport infrastructure is, I look at transport infrastructure here and some of it is very aged. I can imagine in Europe it's even older. So they are risks, but they're a very blatant risk that should show up in any risk assessment for any organisation that has infrastructure in remote assets that you can't layer. You can't have 5 different, layers of security on most remote infrastructure. It's usually just the one.
I thought the same thing. There was a footage of, and it was a very simple attack, but I've heard from a cyber viewpoint, I've heard that there's some 9 to 16 points of failure, even in Sydney, on some of the data infrastructure, whether that's been rectified. That's maybe 5 years old. I heard someone went around and did an assessment of they could bring down Sydney's infrastructure from about 9 to, I think it was either 9 or 16 points, but wasn't many that could be attacked and weren't sort of locked or were accessible. Does that kind of maybe back to Kevin, does that change? Like when you see something, most organisations are aware of what their vulnerabilities are, right? And there's a cost-benefit assessment done of, can we afford to fix that, or do we accept the risk, or we can't, does that kind of attack change the mentality? How do you review back? Do you raise it back to senior management and say, look, I told you that this is a vulnerability. This has happened somewhere else. Now we need to fix it? Or, is it a matter of covering your ass and with a matter of, I told you so, just to make sure that your own sort of role is covered? How do you approach it?
Yeah, it's a simple question, but answering it is actually quite difficult. I think that you're dealing with organisational decision-making processes which are different in each organisation. And the advice that I've always given people is that it's really important for the security people to have credibility when they're giving their advice. Is they've got to be aligned with the strategic goals of the organisation that they work for, and that's critically important. Because I find many of the communication problems between security experts and senior managers in an organisation comes across because the security people don't have the credibility that's needed to get their message across to the top people. And that is really, really important. That's often where the communication breakdown comes from. To give you an example, I've come across organisations where people at the security operational level are saying the management is not listening to me. And when I talk to the senior management, they say the security people are not listening to me. And so there's clearly a disconnect. And what I found generally is senior managers and operational people are both very concerned about security, but they're talking about different risks and different opportunities. And that needs to come together. So we've got to work, I think the security profession has to work on better communication and also understand what risks the strategic managers are dealing with. And when a security threat is raised, we've got to be dynamic about bringing that information into board level and making it a strategic issue. because most of the time the strategic managers are not even aware of the security issue until it's in the newspapers.
And I think the other one is you either have a champion or you have someone who blocks, who's sort of anti either personality or their own agenda, and they're not willing to communicate. And I've had that with chief risk officers where they're just not security spending is just not on their radar. They're looking at other risk, credit risk and financial risk on another level, and they just don't want to have carriage of it. And I think the other disconnect we still see, and I'll open up to the panel, is the disconnect between the cybersecurity teams and the physical security teams or protective security teams, because we hear and we see chief information security officers, but we don't see as often chief security officers who are covered across the whole gambit. Maybe Rachel and Natalie, do you have much to do with the cyber teams? Maybe we'll start with Natalie, if you don't mind. Natalie, being protective security, do you touch much with your cybersecurity teams or your information security teams, particularly when we talk about response in this aspect of this session? Is there much of a touch point?
So in-house we have obviously our two different functions, one cyber security and one like physical protective security. Currently, I mean, that's kind of like, security awareness and your security culture and how it's being driven. So cyber likes to send out a lot of emails, usually phishing emails and that type of thing, and tick the boxes. But in a way, we're kind of competing against each other. We don't have a lot to do with each other. And really, I'm not sure about anybody else, but I personally think that we need to sort of ditch that kind of like ego-driven security approach and just be like, this is your lane on the highway and this is a 4-lane highway. Yours is the first lane, mine is the second lane, the next person is the third lane and the fourth lane, and we're all going down together and we're about to just like hit a massive pothole. What are we going to do? Let's all come together, because this is, but you have to have, like you said, people who have that mindset above you to be like, I'm going to facilitate this type of growth. I'm not going to hold people back. And you have to have a type of confidence in the security professional where they could go, I know this person is going to greatly exceed me, and that's nothing against me. I need to push them because they're going to make this easy for me. They're going to troubleshoot everything and provide feedback. And you have to develop those long-term working relationships. Unfortunately, sometimes you have to go through a little bit of hardship and security failures for people to start going, maybe I should start listening to the security professional.
Yes.
So, yeah.
I think the other thing you see in public service, doesn't matter what level, people's roles change a lot too, right? People come and go. So establishing a long-term relationship, I find it's easier in the private sector as consultant. Like most of us have been in the industry for a while, and you develop long-term relationships because we're stable. In-house, people are moving around all the time. Rachel, in your previous roles and even currently, the touch points between cyber and protective security.
I've got to say,
yeah.
I was there. My apologies.
No.
I've got to say, Natalie, I love that analogy about everyone on the highway and each with their own lane and about to hit a pothole. Perfect. Love it. But in the real world, in my experience, both in-house working and also as a consultant, IT security and cybersecurity will really only get involved when it's putting new security devices, cameras and other devices that are all interlinked, onto their network. Up until that point, they really don't have a lot of care about what the protective security function does, unless it's also putting in maybe a camera into their comms room where their gear is, because then they're going to want to know, who's looking at it. Will they be able to see me doing my job? If I slack off for a bit of a break in there, will I be watched and monitored? That kind of thing. So yeah, there still is a divide. I think it's getting better because of technology, but we're not there yet.
Seeing in some, I'll say, local government in particular, the IT teams have taken on the likes of CCTV, just because it becomes an IT system and it's often funded as well. But then they're not prepared to take on the public safety aspects of that? There's that divide between, well, we handle the IT from the switch onwards, but beyond the switch to the actual camera, we don't really care because that's someone else's problem. And so they don't necessarily get that protective security responsibility and obligation. Dan Ehrenreich, who was with us on Wednesday, physical security is a strong precondition to cybersecurity, and that is a fundamental there. Maybe to the security function, maybe back to Kevin. Does security functions need to change based on risk level? Is it something that can be adapted sometimes? Depends on the organisation. Every organisation is different, I understand. But does the security function potentially, does that make a difference if it moves based on risk level?
I think that's a great question, Chris, and yes, is the short answer, that there needs to be adaptability in the way security responds to the threat. So we've talked a little bit about cyber and physical there. Well, if you've got some sort of threat that has a physical element to it, but through cyber means, well, the two teams are going to be working together, and you've got to bring them together and say, look, you got to sort this problem out between you. You know, so in the resilience models that I work with, we talk about how we might have redundant systems, but also we might have systems that provide, like, redundancy is a form of diversity, but we can also have a form of resilience where we've got diversity through function. So we can have two functional units in an organisation, for example, which should be able to do the job if one of those sections can't for some reason. So if all your operational people are running outside trying to deal with a particular problem, and you've got IT people there who can take over the CCTV and the alarm monitoring and all that sort of stuff, that should happen. And that should happen quickly. And it should be totally adaptable. The sort of simulations that Ben was talking about is really important to develop that kind of capability, where the different groups have to learn to work out how they can help their colleagues. And I think the highway analogy is fantastic too, because you've got to learn to change lanes sometimes, right? And so I think that is really the key to making all of this better, is to have greater adaptability.
The other one is, and again, just even with Dan in the audience there, the session, and I encourage anyone who missed on Wednesdays, it's available on demand, the operational technology cybersecurity component was a very good session looking at, you've got to get your OT, it's a different mindset. It's SIA versus CIA, if I'm right. I can't remember the SIA now, that escapes me, but their purposes are different, but you still need to meet in the middle. But you need to make sure that both ends are right done first. As you say, you are in your lane, and you need to make sure that you stay in your lane, but you need to be able to change and communicate at the same time. I think, again, coming back to that analogy. Let's go to some of the standards, and again, the old covering your ass aspect. Ben, you've raised some, and then also Kevin, you raised ISO 22372. Infrastructure resilience, and you're also working on the energy resilience, if I'm not mistaken, at the moment. It is about resilience, I suppose, in terms of that planning, making sure that you've got resiliency built into your planning, both at an operational level as well as system level. Yeah, so the standards community are working pretty hard on this. So I currently sit on two resilience standards committees, the two that you just mentioned, Chris. So the infrastructure resilience standard is fairly advanced in its development. This is an ISO standard, and this is really relating to all types of infrastructure. And it's not an engineering standard; it's a management standard, and it's about how do we do all the things we've been talking about to get organisations to cooperate with each other, not just units within the same organisation, but different organisations that rely on or operate infrastructure.
So if you're a train network, for example, you might have different companies that run the trains and the stations. You might have different organisations when you go interstate, or in some countries where they have go across borders. So supply chains are the same issue, where you've got multiple organisations, and we've got to think about inputs to our organisation and outputs. And we've got to make sure that different organisations are cooperating with each other with the risk management. Whereas I think in the last 20 years or so, there's been a great focus on focusing on risks to our organisation, internal, and that is one of the causes of risk management failure at the bigger infrastructure level. So we've got to make sure that organisations cooperate with each other for the benefit of society. So this is raising risk management to managing risk to society instead of just our own organisation. That's really, really important.
I might come back to the maybe to Ben. The outcome, and again, it was safety, reliability, availability, SRA, I beg your pardon, for operational technology versus confidentiality, integrity, availability for CIA on the IT side. They are different. Availability is the sort of the main one in between there, but safety, reliability really is that protective security aspect. We take that focus versus confidentiality and integrity. Business continuity, one of the outcomes from the OT cybersecurity session was it does become a business continuity play, right? Which is a resiliency play as well. Do you have much to do with business continuity planning as such, or advising on business continuity? And also, Natalie, welcome to comment on that. But maybe to Ben, much to do on business continuity?
Not too much myself. It seems to be the role that no one wants to get stabbed with.
It's a
Because it's hard to do.
Nightmare,
yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
But I did read a good article from our friends in the National Protective Security Authority in the UK, and they just put out guidance for mitigating sabotage on critical infrastructure, and it has some good things in there for incident response and business continuity. So I'll drop the link into the chat.
Great. Thank you very much. Rachel?
Yeah, question without notice there. Look, again, I've touched on it a little bit, and mostly in my studies, but I'm sort of dealing with the prevention aspect of it, less around planning for recovery after an incident in most organisations. As a consultant, most companies that I go into will have their own business continuity and planning sort of teams or people engaged. So they will often be a stakeholder, but they'll take over that side of the work. It's not something that I've consulted on personally.
Very good. And Natalie, do you have much to do or any input to BCP?
Yeah, so actually I'm currently very, very lucky, and I've only really just come to realise this in the last couple of weeks, that my direct line manager, who is my director, is an absolute weapon when it comes to returning to business as usual. I think, honestly, he's just fallen into that sort of stream without realising it, but I think he understands how resilient our security is, and it's like sort of multi-dimensionalness, and to be able to push to get us back to BAU and operating standards. And then obviously in security, we move everything behind the scenes and then process it and all that sort of stuff. But the quicker a company, an organisation, a business, an agency can return to BAU really demonstrates how resilient their security system is in a protective setting. So things like if your bollards have been damaged, with like ram raids or smash and grabs and things like that. If you've had power outages because you don't have an off-site sort of second generator running. Some businesses have that, especially if you're running, some of the leaded agencies, they'll have backup infrastructure. So you know, they don't go down too often. These types of sort of planning, obviously, maybe Kevin's done this when he built Parliament House security systems. You have to have sort of multiple layers. You know, security is what we can see, and you have layers going up, layers coming down, layers sort of going into all aspects of how to build these robust systems. So I actually have never really experienced a slow return to BAU. I'm quite thankful for that. But I have been very lucky to be surrounded with quite, I would say, dominant and competent men in security that have really led and guided our security systems, which is like, I'm so lucky. So, yeah.
Well, it might help the more incidents we have. We've had a number of blackout events or IT outages as well, which I think wakes a lot of organisations up as to what we do. Kevin, hand raised.
Yeah, just wanted to just sort of add a little bit there that business continuity planning is usually directed at trying to take the business back to where it was before the incident. When we talk about resilience, so business continuity planning is part of that, but sometimes we can't go back to how the business was before. We've got to move forward. And this is where we have this concept of building back better. So when we build our organisation or our buildings or whatever after the event, which might have been catastrophic, we've got to build it back in a better way than we did before, and that's really important too.
Although, again, easier said than done. I suppose that comes maybe back to Aaron as well in terms of new systems or new technology, access control. One of the aspects of this particular session was looking at physical access, where physical access is breached or physical access to assets is a concern, and I think it's underappreciated from the cyber teams of the importance, and it's a gap they often keep. What's your current observations on capabilities of cyber? The cyber lock is a good example of a physical cyber system, and I think last time we had you on, we were looking at master keying systems and access control systems. Some of the current trends there that the audience should be aware of.
Look, I'll touch on that. What was mentioned before, where we talk about the physical and the cyber working in silos, or the IT and physical working in silos. I'm finding, mainly because I spend so much time in the remote infrastructure, it's the IT teams driving the protection of their equipment out in the field.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing that there is that coming together of these two teams, that they are sort of crossing over their own boundaries, I suppose, or getting involved in each other's work. So that's sort of one thing I'm seeing. As far as the business as usual, I completely agree that you've got to come back better. I'd imagine if we look at the Parliament House incident, you know, they're not going to go back to business as usual. There's going to be a big change there as far as how they manage the access to the fences and security patrols and everything else. It's a big part of what we do in the physical security sense, as far as the locking side goes, is, you know, how quickly can a breach be reacted to and you know, repaired and put back to the way it was. And with the critical infrastructure, I guess, entities at the moment, I think they're in a really, really good position going forward. We now have, you know, more detailed risk assessments based on the requirements for SOCI. So all these infrastructure companies now have these risk management plans, but with the increase in the threat level, that would tend or lend itself to increasing budgets. So we've got very detailed plans for these organisations, plus a possible increase in budget. And I think the next couple of years could be, you know, I think the government or Department of Home Affairs is really going to get a good outcome based on SOCI, because all the pillars are there, I suppose, to be able to get that increase in security.
Well, it's a good point. I think we're in a transition mode, and we're still post-SOCI, still very, very early days. And then also we're changing, you know, I would say a change. It's almost like climate change. There's a change. It's not global warming. It's not security warming, but there's a change afoot, I think, in the security environment now, and it is adapting. It's going through a transition. and we're on the back of a SOCI Act and critical infrastructure with a renewed appreciation of the cybersecurity landscape. And I think this is now going to sort of level off at a protective security landscape and environment that we need to be aware of. I've just thrown in, I think, just to finish off, we've got 10 minutes, but any updates on crowded places? I was just randomly doing some research. I try to keep up. I'm on just through the ASIO business BAU, I can't remember what it's called, but the ASIO link. I think most of the audience should be aware of that as a good update, at least to keep current. But there's new active armed offender guidelines for crowded places. Well, I think they're new. Any changes or observations that we've seen? Anything new that's come through at a national security level? Are these new active armed offender guidelines? How long have they been around? Do we know? Maybe Matt, yeah.
Yes, for open spaces crowd control. So individual police units or like policing jurisdictions will have these in place. They're generally things like riot squads or, not things escalated to like SOG level or anything like that. But there is open space crowd control, and some guidelines have been around for probably maybe the last 10 to 15 years. Yeah. I think now we're starting to see, because there's a bit of like, the evolving threat landscape is sort of moving away from like the ideology and the behavioural sort of component of crime drives of like organisations working together and radicalising people. The uptick from COVID was that people felt quite isolated. We were all staying at home. We lost our sense of community. Now people are jumping onto the internet. They're being radicalised, and we're trying to implement like PCBE type sort of structures. And this open space crowd control is starting to see some good developments, because we know that, motivated offenders, when you look at sort of like criminology theories like routine activities and things like that, where you have to have a motivated offender, the absence of capable guardians, and then, a victim, not always willing. And sometimes the victim and the perpetrator can be the same person. If you see out of a security setting, narcotic type use, they're the same person. But in open spaces, the main ideology most lone actors are driving now is that, where can I go to perform the most amount of damage to create the most amount of impact? So with all this new funding that's going into the ASIO portfolio and the leaded agencies, you will see that in the next sort of 4 to 6 to 8 years, we're going to start getting some really robust policy being built for us to build better security systems and to be able to act. So, yeah, I mean, it all ties in together, but yeah.
Well, I'm glad there's a lot of that criminology theory does come into play, right? Absolutely. I just looked at the copyright 2023, these must have come through. So last year, the active armed offender guidelines must have been updated. It just looks like a new cover, but we have had them around in terms of crowded places. But again, well worth having a look. And I think that's some of the core from a security manager's viewpoint is go back to the basics, making sure that you have your best guidelines in place and the key standards that you go by. There's many. You can get overwhelmed sometimes, but then also making sure your communication channels to your board and key decision makers are there as well. I think the other thing we've seen in cyber is to take it back to protective security is practice as much as you can get with your stakeholders will make all the difference. Look, just some closing comments, I suppose. I'll open it up to the panel. Ben, I know you've got some takeaways in terms of some workshops coming up, but just your general take on security planning and response in what is literally a week-old new environment here in Australia in terms of a probable level back what we were maybe 3 or 4 years ago?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how everyone responds to that change in threat level. The real nuances you need to keep in mind from the ASIO threat reporting is that it's not necessarily an increase in capability, it's an increase in unpredictability of the actors. So we're still looking at bladed weapons, firearms, explosives.
Very good, and that's exactly improvised explosives as well. So I do have it. I'll put this link on just in terms of some quotes from Mike Burgess there on the Security Magazine channel. And again, the threats are becoming harder to predict and identify. Takeaway comments, Natalie or Rachel, either one go first.
I'll jump in. Oh, sorry, Natalie. I was waiting for you. We were both doing that, that polite thing, that little game. Takeaway comments. Really, what I've taken for this is we all seem to be really on the same page in that it really does come down to the basics and having, all of those basic ducks in a row to mitigate against these, varied threat actors, and the unpredictability is something that we're never going to be able to prepare for because you can't document a moving target. Essentially, it's very difficult to do to know what's going to happen. I will say that social media is not helping. Today's audience is larger than ever in terms of protest and security incidents. It used to be a really big deal to be able to get in the paper. Now everyone has a global audience just by having a username and login. Now, that's really scary because everyone can get their message across, be it good, bad, or, politically motivated, or just, they're having a bad day, so simply. So it really does demonstrate that we need to be prepared for anything. But also, conversely, that provides an excellent opportunity in terms of intelligence. So whilst our intelligence gathering is now utilised more than ever by private organisations and government in ways that it hasn't been before, it really needs to become a fundamental step in the security basics and the security 101.
Good point on social media. It needs to be in your response planning as well as to not just monitoring it, but controlling the narrative as well if it does get out of hand. Natalie?
Yeah, I guess I'd just like to add that even if you don't come from necessarily a security background or maybe a risk management background, that don't be afraid to start applying for some of these positions that you see start coming up over the sort of next couple of years, because external ideas, sometimes you need people that think outside of the box. And if you've come from a different stream, you have a different type of mindset to us. And it's not that you're not working in the team with us, but when you think of something, it helps us expand our security sort of mindedness, and we're able to go, oh, we never thought of that, let's implement something, and that could stop a potential attack later in the future. Obviously, to anybody who's watching, get out to networking events as well. ASIS is brilliant. They have it across all of Australia. Even if you're just a student and you don't really know and you're not super confident, just get in and start having conversations with people. You'll feel awkward, you'll feel uncomfortable, but your growth will be so brilliant, and you never know where you end up in 10 years' time or 15 years' time. You have to be okay to fail and sort of suck at something new, to be able to sit on panels and have these robust discussions to build and kind of drive, this security that we're trying to build for all Australians. So don't be afraid, have a crack, get into it, add us all on our socials and everything, and, keep following and doing all that sort of stuff. But yeah, thanks for having us here. It's really good.
Natalie, and it's a good segue. I'll go to Kevin. I was going to go to Aaron next, but good segue to ASIS. I think the other thing is from the audience here, particularly if you do have I always say people with a real job, if you've got a security management responsibility, it's a challenging role. But again, ASIS and your local chapter is very keen to hear from you. Always willing to have you present and give your ideas and share those ideas. I think we can only encourage it. So if you reach out to your local chapter, if you're not already a member, and it's a good segue to Kevin as the Regional Vice President for ASIS International. Kevin, some closing comments here?
Well, certainly ASIS International does provide the platform for a lot of discussion and learning and comradeship and and everybody getting together and exchanging ideas. So I certainly encourage everybody to get involved with ASIS International one way or another, and certainly support that 110%. I'd also just like to make a comment that a lot of people describe risk as the effect of uncertainty on outcomes of organisations and projects and and operations and those sorts of things. And resilience is really about adapting or absorbing that uncertainty and then adapting to it. And so that's really the simplest way to look at that. That we do the risk analysis first. We accept that as uncertainty increases, as Ben said, we go from up to probable. It probably means the uncertainty's up at the moment, and therefore we need to work out how to be more resilient to these threats. So that's really what we've been talking about through the whole session.
Nice. I think it's also risk is the opportunity aspect from a business. I think if you can be there as a risk advisor, not just a security advisor, and looking for opportunities to transfer risk, avoid it completely, or mitigate it significantly at low cost, you become sort of that trusted advisor as well, rather than just accepting that it's too unpredictable, it's all too hard. I think you've got to be really proactive in what you do. And Aaron, look, firstly, thank you to DavCore Group for supporting this series. It's not just the first year, and I'll accolades to George as well at DavCore, but just some takeaways from yourself there in this domain.
Look, going forward, I'm really positive. I mean, as I said before, I live in that critical infrastructure space, and I don't think, talking to all the security managers day to day, what I feel really positive about is even the smaller entities that don't necessarily have to comply with doing their risk assessments and risk management plans, they're doing it aspirationally anyway. A lot of them are. They're trying to lift. Every organisation is trying to lift their security posture, so it's really positive.
Beautiful. Well, look, what I'll do, I'm going to close off just 1 second. Hopefully this works. Just to give our sponsors recognition. Look, thank you very much to our panel. We're at the top of the hour and appreciate the audience coming along today. And hopefully you've enjoyed and taken some good outcomes from that session. This will be available on a recorded session over the weekend, but certainly first thing on Monday. But thank you very much to Dr. Kevin Foster with ASIS International. Rachel DeLuca, thanks for coming on in the end. We got through that, Rachel. It's a good effort. Would have been disappointed had you not come on. Director with Protective Security Advisory. Ben Beard in Canberra, Director with Mithril Security. Always great insights, Ben. And check out Mithril, as well as Rachel as well, for their training in Canberra and in Melbourne. Aaron Lincoln, big thanks to DavCore Group, National BDM Technical Products. And Natalie Cook, great to have your insights. You're a great asset there in Canberra, Natalie. Criminology and counterterrorism. You bring a good perspective and fresh perspective from what I see, with a years of experience as well. I think you're underrated. So hopefully we'll hear from you again very much so. So on that note, thank you very much for coming along. And as I mentioned, the links will be in the show notes and this will be up on Monday. But thanks for joining us today and enjoy the rest of your Friday. Have a good weekend.